Commander Varaxis floated through the human colony's surveillance system like a phantom through fog. Her 16 sensory appendages tingled with anticipation as she collected the emotional data being broadcast from the settlement. Fear, anxiety, desperation. Each negative emotion was a delicacy to her species, the Netheri, who fed on the psychic energy of suffering. Exquisite, she thought, savoring the distress emanating from the struggling colony on Kepler 438b. The Netheri Council had selected her for this mission due to her exceptional talent for harvesting suffering. She had distinguished herself by orchestrating situations that maximized emotional pain without detection. Her biochemical receptors could process more suffering than any other member of her species, making her both revered and feared among her kind. Commence Phase 1, she transmitted to her cloaked ship orbiting the planet. Her crew of 7 responded with silent acknowledgement, deploying the atmospheric modulators that would subtly alter the colony's weather patterns. The humans had established their settlement 3 Earth years ago, unaware they had chosen a world already claimed by the Netheri as a feeding ground. These bipeds were fascinating to Varaxis, fragile yet resilient, emotionally complex beyond most species the Netheri had encountered. Their capacity for suffering was unmatched in the galaxy, making them perfect prey. From her hidden observation, Varaxis watched as the colony's crops began to wither under the artificial drought her crew had created. The first tendrils of heightened anxiety reached her sensory organs, and she shuddered with pleasure. "The humans are initiating emergency protocols," reported Kethris, her second in command. "Their resource rationing has begun." "Excellent. Maintain surveillance but remain undetected," Varaxis ordered. "I want to observe their social dynamics as resources become scarce." What made humans particularly valuable was how their suffering multiplied through social connections. When one suffered, those who cared for them suffered too, creating a cascade effect that could feed an entire Netheri settlement for cycles. As night fell over the colony, Varaxis detected something unexpected, a solitary human walking beyond the settlement's protective barrier. This was unusual behavior during a crisis. Intrigued, she shifted her observation focus to the lone figure. The human, her data identified him as Elias Riker, colony agricultural specialist, moved with purpose toward a sheltered area where experimental crops were growing. Despite the colony's dire situation, his emotional signature was oddly balanced. Not panicked like the others. Determined. Hopeful even. Varaxis found herself drawn to this anomaly. Most prey species became increasingly predictable as pressure mounted, but this human seemed different. He worked methodically through the night, adjusting moisture reclamation systems, applying some kind of solution to the struggling plants. By dawn, when most colonists emerged to face another day of crisis, Riker had created a small miracle. A section of crops showing signs of recovery despite the artificial drought. "Fascinating," Varaxis murmured. "He's found a way to counter our atmospheric manipulation." "Should we increase the intensity?" Kethris asked. "No," Varaxis decided. "I want to understand this human's resilience. It may help us develop more effective techniques." She couldn't explain the strange sensation in her central nervous system, something beyond mere curiosity. It was almost like admiration, dangerous territory for a Netheri commander. When Riker finally returned to the colony, exhausted but radiating quiet satisfaction, Varaxis made a decision that would change everything. She would study this human personally, up close. The Council had forbidden direct contact, but she rationalized that understanding human resilience would ultimately serve their feeding needs. "Prepare a human-compatible physical projection," she instructed her biomorphic engineers. "I'm going to infiltrate the colony." What Varaxis couldn't admit even to herself was that something about Elias Riker had awakened a hunger different from the one she'd always known. Not for his suffering, but for understanding what made him different. Varaxis's humanoid projection moved awkwardly at first. The bipedal form was inefficient. Only 2 visual receptors, no sensory appendages, and a rigid exoskeleton covered in soft, vulnerable tissue. How had this species ever achieved spaceflight? She had integrated herself into the colony as Vera, Axiom, supposedly a specialist in agricultural recovery sent from the Earth Central Command. Her falsified credentials had passed inspection without question. The desperate colony welcomed any help they could get. 3 days into her infiltration, Veraxis found herself assigned to work directly with Elias Riker. Up close, the human was even more peculiar. His skin had been darkened by prolonged exposure to the planet's sun, etched with lines around his eyes and mouth. Unlike the smooth, luminescent skin of the Nithari, his imperfections seemed to tell a story. "You're holding that soil analyzer upside down," Riker said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar tone that Veraxis's translators identified as amusement. "I'm testing an alternative method," she responded quickly, adjusting her grip. Riker laughed, a sound that sent an unexpected vibration through Veraxis's projected form. "Creative thinking, I like that." For the next several hours they worked, side by side in the experimental agricultural dome. Veraxis observed how Riker had developed a hybrid strain of earth wheat that could withstand the altered atmospheric conditions. His ingenuity was remarkable, especially for a species with such limited lifespans. "Why do you work so hard?" she asked as they calibrated irrigation systems. "The colony could evacuate. Request emergency support." Riker paused, wiping perspiration from his brow. "Because this is home now. 300 people have put everything into making a life here. We don't give up on home." The concept seemed inefficient to Veraxis. The Nithari abandoned feeding grounds when they became depleted. Attachment to location was illogical. "Even when success seems improbable?" she pressed. "Especially then?" Riker replied, his eyes focused on the distant horizon where the colony's main buildings clustered. "That's when it matters most." As darkness fell, Veraxis transmitted her daily report to the ship, while maintaining her human projection in sleep mode. The subject shows unusual determination despite clear evidence of imminent agricultural collapse. "I recommend intensifying the drought to test the limits of this resilience," Kethris responded with concern. "Commander, your biometric readings show unusual patterns. Is your projection functioning correctly?" Veraxis hesitated before responding. "All systems nominal. Continue the operation as planned." But as she disconnected from the transmission, she recognized the lie. Something was changing within her. The emotional nutrition she'd been harvesting from the colonists no longer satisfied her as it once had. Instead, she found herself drawn to Riker's quiet strength, his capacity for hope in desperate circumstances. The next morning, disaster struck the colony. The main water recycling facility malfunctioned, a coincidental failure engineered by her crew. As emergency protocols engaged, Veraxis watched the fear and panic spread through the settlement. She should have been feasting on this bounty of suffering, but instead felt a disturbing emptiness. Riker immediately volunteered for the repair team, despite having no engineering expertise. Veraxis found herself following him into the damaged facility, where toxic steam filled the air. "You don't have to come," he told her, securing an oxygen mask over his face. "It's dangerous in there." Veraxis struggled with the unfamiliar sensation in her projected form. "I want to help." For the first time in her existence, she meant it. The water recycling facility was a maze of damaged pipes and sparking conduits. Through her human projection, Veraxis could feel the heat against her artificial skin, the sting of chemical-laden steam in her lungs. These sensations, discomfort, pain were new to her. The Nithari observed suffering. They didn't experience it. Riker moved with surprising agility through the hazardous environment, identifying critical systems and prioritizing repairs. He assigned tasks to each member of the volunteer team, including Veraxis, who found herself genuinely struggling with the unfamiliar work. "Pressure's building in Section 4, called out Meredith, the colony's chief engineer. "We need to vent it or the whole system will blow." Riker immediately headed toward the danger zone, but Veraxis caught his arm. "The radiation levels are too high there," she warned, her sensors detecting what human instruments couldn't yet measure. He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her projected form experience an odd malfunction, a rapid rhythmic disturbance in her chest cavity. "How do you know that?" he asked. Veraxis hesitated, calibrating her response. "The spectrometer readings. They suggest ionization patterns consistent with—" "There's no spectrometer in this section," Riker interrupted, his expression shifting to suspicion. Before she could formulate a response, an explosion rocked the facility. A pipe ruptured near Meredith, spraying superheated steam. Without conscious thought, Veraxis moved, faster than her human projection should allow, pushing the engineer out of danger, but exposing herself to the full blast. Pain, actual pain, flooded her consciousness as her projection suffered severe damage. She collapsed to the metal grating, her systems struggling to maintain coherence. Through failing visual receptors, she saw Riker kneeling beside her, his face twisted with concern. Not fear or suspicion now, but worry. For her. "Hold on, Vera," he urged, applying emergency medical treatment to her burns. "Stay with me." The projection was failing, its connection to her true form destabilizing. In moments, it would dissolve, revealing the truth. With her remaining strength, Veraxis activated her emergency extraction protocol. She awoke hours later in her ship's regeneration chamber, her 16 appendages trembling with the echo of pain. Kethris hovered nearby, radiating concern. "Commander, your actions were unprecedented," Kethris stated. "You endangered yourself for a human." "I acted to maintain my cover," Veraxis responded automatically, but the falsehood felt hollow. "The Council is demanding an explanation," Kethris continued. "They've detected anomalies in your feeding patterns. You've harvested minimal suffering, despite optimal conditions." Veraxis floated in silence, her thoughts in turmoil. The truth was unspeakable to Anithari. She had begun to care about what happened to the humans, to Riker specifically. More disturbing still, she'd experienced something when rescuing Meredith that resembled satisfaction. Not the satiation that came from feeding on suffering, but something else entirely. "Intensify the environmental manipulation," she finally ordered. "I need to understand these humans fully before reporting to the Council." "And your projection?" Kethris inquired. "Repair it," Veraxis commanded. "I'm returning to the colony." 3 days later, Vera Axiom reappeared in the colony, claiming to have been evacuated for emergency medical treatment. The humans welcomed her back with genuine warmth, especially Riker, who embraced her human form, an action that sent cascades of unfamiliar sensations through Veraxis's consciousness. "I thought we'd lost you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That night, as the colony celebrated the successful repair of the water facility, Veraxis made a decision that would forever change her destiny. She secretly deactivated the atmospheric modulators her ship had deployed. For the first time in her existence, she chose to alleviate suffering rather than feed on it. The question that haunted her was simple yet existentially terrifying. If she no longer fed on suffering, what was she becoming? Part 4. The revelation rain fell on the colony for the first time in months. Colonists stood outside their dwellings, faces turned upward in disbelief as the life-giving water soaked the parched ground. Children danced in puddles while adults wept with relief. Veraxis observed it all from beneath the overhang of the agricultural dome, experiencing a sensation her Nithari physiology had no classification for. Seeing joy instead of suffering should have been repulsive, even harmful to her kind. Instead, she felt fulfilled. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Riker appeared beside her, his clothing damp from the downpour. "Just when we thought we'd lost everything." "Yes," Veraxis agreed, understanding for the first time the true meaning of the word. Beautiful. As days passed, and the colony began to recover, Veraxis found herself increasingly drawn into their community. She attended communal meals, participated in decision-making councils, even joined their rituals of entertainment, something called movie nights, where they collectively experienced artificial emotions through storytelling. Most disturbing of all, she had stopped reporting to her ship. Kethris had sent multiple queries, each more urgent than the last, but Viraxis ignored them. She was too absorbed in this strange new experiment, living among humans rather than feeding on them. The change didn't go unnoticed by her crew. 2. Cycles after the rain began, Viraxis detected a Nithuri energy signature in the colony's outskirts. She slipped away from the settlement to confront the intruder. Myraxin, she acknowledged her tactical officer, who hovered in true form among the tall grasses. You should not be here. The council has concerns. Myraxin's thought voice was cold. Your behavior has become deviant. You've ceased feeding operations and appear to be engaging in sympathetic behaviors toward the prey. I'm conducting deep research, Viraxis defended. Understanding human resilience will make future harvests more efficient. Myraxin's appendages rippled with skepticism. The council doesn't believe you. They've ordered your immediate return and assigned me to take over the operation. Fear surged through Viraxis, not for herself but for the humans. Myraxin was known for particularly cruel methods of suffering extraction. The mission is mine, Viraxis insisted. I've made progress. What progress? The humans are thriving. Even now, their emotional outputs show predominantly positive readings. Myraxin's sensory organs pulsed with disgust. You will return to the ship for evaluation, or I am authorized to extract you by force. Viraxis knew she couldn't overpower Myraxin in direct confrontation. I request one final cycle to complete my research and prepare transition documents. Reluctantly, Myraxin agreed. One cycle. Then we restore the original mission parameters. That night, as the colony slept, Viraxis struggled with an impossible decision. Her existence as a Nithuri demanded she feed on suffering. But something fundamental had shifted within her. The suffering that once nourished now repulsed her. In the pre-dawn hours, she made her way to Riker's dwelling. She had never entered his private space before, but urgency overrode protocol. She found him asleep, his consciousness cycling through dream states her sensors could partially detect. Elias, she whispered, using his first name for the first time. Wake up. He stirred, blinking in confusion at the sight of her standing in his room. Vera, what's wrong? I need to tell you something about who I really am. His expression changed from confusion to concern. Okay. Viraxis deactivated her human projection protocols, allowing her true form to partially manifest. Her luminescent skin glowing faintly in the darkness, her multiple sensory appendages becoming visible. Riker scrambled backward on his bed, eyes wide. What the hell? I am Viraxis, commander of the Nithuri harvesting fleet, she said, her voice now carrying the harmonic overtones of her species. My kind feeds on suffering. We created the drought that nearly destroyed your colony. The fear and betrayal that radiated from him should have been delicious to her. Instead, it was agonizing. Why are you telling me this? He demanded. Because tomorrow they will replace me with someone who won't hesitate to destroy everything you've built here. She restored her fully human appearance. And because you changed me, Elias, I don't want to feed on suffering anymore. I want to... Stop it. Dawn broke over the colony with ominous red streaks across the sky. Riker had spent the night alternating between shock, anger, and strategic planning. Viraxis had explained everything. The Nithuri, their feeding patterns, the imminent threat posed by Myraxin. So these Nithuri have been manipulating human colonies for centuries? Riker clarified, pacing the confines of his dwelling. Yes, anywhere humans experience unexplained disasters, prolonged suffering with no apparent cause, we have likely been there. Viraxis felt an unfamiliar emotion she now recognized as shame. And your ship can control weather patterns, cause equipment. Failures even influence social dynamics? His scientific mind was quickly processing the tactical implications. Yes, our technology is based on emotional energy manipulation. We can intensify negative emotions or suppress positive ones. Riker stopped pacing. Can it work in reverse? Viraxis tilted her head, a human gesture she'd unconsciously adopted. What do you mean? If your technology can suppress positive emotions, can it also suppress negative ones? Can it amplify positive emotions instead? The question stunned Viraxis. In thousands of cycles, no Nitheri had ever considered using their technology this way. Theoretically, yes, but it would be useless to us. We cannot feed on positive emotional energy. A slow smile spread across Riker's face, not one of happiness, but of determination. But humans can. Throughout the morning, they developed a desperate plan. Riker called an emergency council meeting, initially telling only the colony's leadership the full truth. Remarkably, after their initial disbelief, the council chose to trust Viraxis, partly because she had deactivated her human projection and appeared before them in her true form. "We don't have weapons that can fight their ship," council leader Orima stated bluntly. "We need to implement Riker's plan immediately." By midday, the colony hummed with purposeful activity. Outwardly, they maintained normal operations, but secretly, each resident over 15 years old had been briefed on their role in what they now called Operation Lightwell. As dusk approached, Viraxis sensed Myraxen's presence at the colony's perimeter. "They're here," she warned Riker, who stood beside her at the central plaza. "Are you ready?" he asked, his hand briefly touching her shoulder, a gesture of support that still surprised her. "No Nitheri has ever attempted what I'm about to do," she admitted. "It may destroy me." His eyes held hers. "You're not just a Nitheri anymore." Myraxian appeared at the edge of the gathering crowd, wearing a human projection that barely contained the malevolence beneath. 5 other Nitheri accompanied her, all wearing similar disguises. "Commander Viraxis," Myraxian called out, her voice artificially pleasant. The council grows impatient. Viraxis stepped forward, allowing her human projection to dissolve completely. Gasps rippled through those colonists who hadn't yet seen her true form. She hovered above the ground, her 16 appendages fully extended, her luminescent skin pulsing with energy. "I reject the council's authority," she announced, her voice resonating across the plaza. "This colony is under my protection." Myraxen and the other Nitheri also abandoned their human forms, rising into the evening air like malevolent spirits. "Protection?" Myraxen's thought voice dripped with contempt. "You've become corrupted by prolonged contact with the prey. The council was right to question your stability." "I've evolved," Viraxis corrected. "I've discovered something beyond feeding." "Impossible," Myraxen scoffed. "You've merely fallen into degeneracy." She turned her attention to the assembled humans. "Your suffering will be legendary. We will extract it slowly over many cycles." That was the signal. Riker pressed a device Viraxis had helped him construct, a modified version of Nitheri emotional amplification technology. Instantly, every colonist focused their thoughts on the same emotions: gratitude, compassion, hope, and love. The effect on the Nitheri was immediate and devastating. Myraxen's appendages contorted in agony. The others writhed in the air, their forms flickering as they struggled to maintain coherence. What is this?" Myraxen gasped. Viraxis alone remained stable, though she felt the overwhelming force of the positive emotional energy surging around her. It should have been poison to her system, yet somehow, she had developed the capacity to withstand it. "This is humanity," she answered, moving to hover protectively between the colonists and her former crew. Not just their suffering, their strength, their hope, their capacity for kindness even in darkness. With a desperate shriek, Myraxen launched herself at Viraxis, appendages extended for a killing strike. The 2 Nitheri collided in midair, their forms intertwining in combat rarely seen among their kind. Below, Riker increased the amplifier's power. Colonists joined hands, forming a circle of concentrated emotional energy that rose like a beacon into the night sky. In the midst of the battle, Viraxis felt something extraordinary. The positive energy wasn't destroying her as it was the others. Instead, it was transforming her, filling the emptiness that had once required suffering to satisfy. With newfound strength, she enveloped Myraxin in her appendages. "Feel what I've discovered," she urged, channeling the human's emotions through their connection. For a moment, Myraxin's resistance faltered as the unfamiliar sensations flooded her consciousness. Then, with a final desperate surge, she broke free and retreated toward the waiting ship, the other Netheri following in disarray. As the ship departed orbit, its sensors permanently disabled by the emotional overload, Varaxis descended slowly to the ground. The effort had depleted her energy reserves to critical levels. Her luminescence dimmed as she settled onto the plaza stones. Riker rushed to her side, kneeling beside her fading form. "Varaxis, stay with us. We did it. They're gone." "Yes," she agreed, her thought voice now barely audible. "They will report that this world is toxic to our kind. You'll be safe." "But you—" His voice broke. "I made my choice," she whispered, as darkness claimed her. Consciousness returned slowly to Varaxis, like distant stars appearing one by one in an evening sky. She first became aware of voices, human voices murmuring nearby. Then came unfamiliar sensations, warmth against her form, the rhythm of air moving in and out, the steady pulse of a flowing liquid. When she finally opened her visual receptors, eyes, she found herself in an unfamiliar configuration. The 16 sensory appendages that had been her birthright were gone. Instead, she had limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with limited sensory organs. She had become human, or something, very close to it. "She's awake," came Riker's voice, filled with relief and something deeper. Varaxis tried to speak but produced only a rough sound. Her throat, such a strange way to communicate, felt unused, new. Orima, the council leader, leaned forward. "Don't try to talk yet. Your transformation is still stabilizing." Transformation, the word echoed through her mind as memories reassembled themselves. The confrontation with Myraxin, the overwhelming surge of positive emotion, the choice she had made to protect the colony, to protect Riker, even at the cost of her own existence. But she hadn't ceased to exist. She had changed. Over the next several days, as her strength returned, Varaxis learned what had happened. When she collapsed after the battle, her Netheri form had begun to disintegrate, its energy matrix unable to sustain itself without feeding on suffering. Riker had refused to let her fade away. "You used the emotional amplifier," she said when she could finally speak, her voice carrying an echo of her former harmonic tones. "You reversed the polarity." Riker nodded, his hand resting beside hers on the medical bay bed. "We theorized that if negative emotions could sustain your original form, perhaps positive emotions could fuel a transformation. It was unprecedented," added Dr. Lorimel, the colony's xenobiologist who had overseen her metamorphosis. "Your genetic structure reconfigured itself, using human DNA patterns from our database as a template. You're not fully human, but something new, a hybrid form capable of processing positive emotional energy." Varaxis looked down at her hands. 5 fingers, skin with a faint luminescent quality that marked her alien origins. She could still sense the emotional fields around her, but differently now. Instead of feeding on suffering, she was nourished by connection, by kindness, by the very emotions she once harvested. "The Council will send others," she warned, "once they realize Myraxin failed." "We'll be ready," Riker assured her. "You've given us the knowledge to protect ourselves, and you're proof that change is possible even for the Netheri." 1 month later, Varaxis stood before the colony's full assembly. She had regained her strength, though her new form required unfamiliar maintenance, food, sleep, the curious human practice of bathing. Yet each new experience brought discovery and, remarkably, joy. "The defensive systems are complete," she announced, displaying the emotional shield technology she had helped them develop. "Any Netheri ship that approaches will detect only emotions that are toxic to them." Applause filled the community hall, Another human practice she had grown to appreciate. The sound of many hands coming together to express approval seemed infinitely more satisfying than the silent acknowledgement of the Netheri. Later, as twilight painted the sky in colors her new eyes perceived with startling vividness, Riker found her standing at the edge of the now thriving agricultural fields. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up immortality, your powers, your connection to your people?" Varaxis considered the question. The Netheri lived for thousands of cycles, their consciousness preserved through the emotional energy they consumed. In choosing this new form, she had accepted limitations, a finite lifespan, physical vulnerability, the capacity for pain, both physical and emotional. "No," she said finally. "I fed on suffering for centuries, yet remained empty. Now I feel everything. Sorrow, yes, but also wonder, connection, purpose." She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. "I now understand what you meant about home. It's not a place. It's where we choose to belong." Riker's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Another new sensation, touch that conveyed meaning beyond words. "The Colony's Council has officially recognized you as a citizen," he told her. "Your knowledge of xenobiology and emotional field technology has been classified as essential expertise. You're officially our interspecies relations specialist." She smiled, an expression that had once been merely a calculated part of her human disguise but now came naturally. "And what does that entail?" "Helping us understand the other beings we'll encounter as we expand, teaching us how to connect, rather than conflict." His expression grew serious. "And perhaps someday finding a way to help other Netheri discover what you have." The thought was startling. "My kind has fed on suffering for millennia. The concept of another way would be heresy." "So was the idea of a Netheri protecting humans," he reminded her. "Yet here you are." As night fell completely, they walked back, toward the lights of the colony, a small outpost of humanity in the vast darkness of space. Varaxis felt the emotional energy of the settlement washing over her, the complex blend of challenges and triumphs, sorrows and joys that made human existence so richly textured. Once she had craved their suffering, seeing only its potential, to feed her endless hunger. Now, transformed by a kindness she had never expected to receive, she craved something entirely different. To be part of their story, to contribute to their resilience, to learn what it meant to be not just alive, but truly living. "Home," she repeated, tasting the word and finding it sweet. "Yes, I think I understand now." Above them, stars glittered like possibilities in the velvet sky, some perhaps harboring other Netheri feeding grounds, other human colonies struggling against invisible tormentors. Someday she would help them find each other, not as predator and prey, but as beings capable of transformation. For now, though, she had found her place, not in the suffering of others, but in the infinite capacity of humanity to offer kindness, even to those who had once sought to harm them. That, she realized, was the most remarkable human trait of all, and the one that had ultimately undone her.